You want to write a screenplay, but you're not quite sure where to start. Well, I'm going to give you just kind of an overview of the process for writing a screenplay. Just maybe think about it like a checklist. Like if I move through this and I move through this and move through this, at the end you're going to have a screenplay. Now, is there any way that we can possibly deal with all the nuances and everything of writing a screenplay in one little short YouTube video? No. But this will at least give you an idea of what to expect in the process and just kind of like how long some of the things will take if you're thinking about writing a screenplay. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like if you find value. Thank you for subscribing. There's some links below. I'll mention one of those in a moment, but let's not waste any more time. Let's jump in. My goal today is the 10,000 foot view of the screenwriting process. How do you start? Where do you go? Just so you kind of have an idea of what are the steps I need to do. Now, if you want more information about screenwriting and like literally how to do it, there's a link below for a class that I'm releasing as I record this video. It's going to be live in about 2 weeks. So if you're watching this video after it's released and at least a week or so after it's been released, that class should be live and active. It's the Screenwriting Fast Track. Just click on that link. You can learn more information about what's there, but it might be really helpful to you. What I've done there, because I used to teach writing and screenwriting at a university, is I've taken essentially what would be a first year graduate level screenwriting course, kind of boiled it down to all the things that really matter. And that's what that class is. So it's kind of like getting a graduate level first semester class in a screenwriting degree. If that's of interest to you, be sure to check out that link below. All right, so what's the process? Well, the first thing, we're going to start with an idea. Now, if you're just starting out, the idea creation is usually one of the first things that you're like, oh, I've got an idea, I should write a movie. Or you think of an idea and you think, oh, that would be a really great movie. Typically, it revolves around one of three things. Either a premise, which is like a setup of something like, you know, an asteroid is coming to destroy the Earth. Okay, that's a premise, right? So this thing is happening. That sounds interesting. I should write a movie about that. The second thing is the world. And this is where you start thinking of all the things that are in the world. You may not be thinking of any specific thing, but it's like, oh, this world is like a normal world, but there's also people that can use magic. And, you know, maybe they go into this other place, maybe let's call it Hogwarts or whatever. So you start thinking of a world. And the third way to kind of create an idea is just a character. You start thinking of a person, a unique person. You're like, I really like this character. This would be a really interesting person. And what if I took them and then dropped them into this other world or put them with this premise? So those are the three things that you tend to start thinking about. Now, you may already have an idea, and that's great. The issue is that really a marketable idea, or is it a good idea? Is it hookable? And a hookable idea is something where when you tell it to someone, they can automatically start to imagine some scenes and automatically start to see, ooh, I bet this happens and this happens and this happens. And that doesn't mean that they're anticipating the plot. It means that they're starting to imagine the world. And you want people to be able to do that when you're talking about a movie, because then that automatically hooks them and helps them to want to actually read your story. So you start with the idea. And in your creation of the idea, if you haven't created a main character, that's your second option, is you create a main character. Who is driving the story? Who are we going to follow? Who's going to be determining the course of action of what happens, and who are we following as the story unfolds? Typically, the main character is either the most interesting person in the world or the premise that you've created, or two, the most unexpected person in the world that you've created. So it might be, ooh, this person we might expect, but they're super interesting, they're super fascinating. Or it might be somebody that we just don't expect at all. Okay, those are two really great types of main characters. Now, are those the only two? Well, no. Okay, again, I'm giving you the 10,000 foot view here today. So just kind of understand that that's what we're doing. We are not getting into all the nitty gritty details here today. So, but those are two kind of basic ones that you can kind of think about. Probably the most important question to answer when you think about the character, though, is if somebody were to ask you, like, let me back up. If you're talking with somebody about your movie idea and you say, and here's my main character, if somebody were to ask you, why them? Why are they the main character? You should have an answer. And if you don't have an answer, they're not they're probably not a good main character, or they're not somebody that's really going to drive the story. You need somebody that's unique enough that's going to hook us in and be like, oh, I want to follow them. The third step is you just fill in the blank. Now, by the fill in the blanks, this is what I mean. You have to understand what a story is. A story is about someone who wants something badly, is having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. So what you do is you take your main character, who is now the someone in that thing, and you fill in the blanks. My main character who wants something badly, what is it they want? And what gives them trouble in getting it? And do they get it or not? And if you can do that, now you at least know you have a complete story. Okay, here's the idea for a story. And it can be as sweeping as you want it, as epic as you want it. It can span multiple years, or it might span the course of one day. Maybe it's just you've got a dad who's trying to get home in time for his kid's birthday party, which starts at 7 o'clock, and he's got to get a present on the way. I mean, maybe that's all it is. That could be a complete story, and it could be an interesting movie if the main character is interesting enough, if the world is interesting enough, if the premise is interesting. Like, those are the things that kind of are at play here. So you have to start thinking about the idea, you get your main character, and then you fill in the blanks. Someone who wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, and do they get it, yes or no? And if you can do that, okay, now you've got a story. Now you move on to the next step. The next step is just planning out your story. So you have the idea, right? You've got the loose structure. You've got your fill in the blanks, what a story is. Now you start figuring out, okay, what are the things that happen along the way? And this is where the skill of screenwriting actually is really brought to bear, because you are trying to figure out all kinds of things. You're juggling lots of balls and spinning plates and knives and chainsaws all at the same time. So you have to be able to figure out, how do I navigate all of this all at once and make sure all these characters are there? And as you start to plan, you're going to start to create other characters. So you'll create your antagonist, you'll create other supporting characters who are helping or hindering your main character, and you're going to start to figure all those out in your planning process. And you figure out, okay, here's what's going to happen, here's this group of scenes, this group of scenes, this group of scenes. And typically a screenplay has around 60 to 90 scenes, give or take. So, you know, you can kind of use that as a guide. You kind of want to have that many things going on. Now, are there more than that going on? Yeah, because you've got emotional beats of characters and story beats and subplots and other things going on that you have to figure out how to stitch together. So the planning is actually kind of a big deal. Now, some people like to plan a whole lot. I mean, here's all my scenes, here's what happens in each scene, here's the character beats, here's the emotional beats, like all that kind of stuff. Other people like literally plan on like one little note card or one sheet of paper, and that's it. So that's up to you. My suggestion is you should plan a little more than you think you should. I've also got a video about outlining and things like that. I'll link that up here. Now, the next step, which you will hear people talk about, is to write a synopsis or a treatment. Well, do you need to do this? Okay, mostly no. If you're on staff on a TV show, or if you're writing a feature film on assignment, like you've actually been paid money to write a film, yeah, you might have to write a treatment or a synopsis. Essentially, those are, I'm boiling this down, those are essentially like short story forms of your movie. So you kind of write it in short story format. Typically, each paragraph is a new scene. Here's what happens here, here's what happens here, here's what happens here, and you write it all the way to the end. It's usually like somewhere between 10 and 20 pages, depending on how detailed you are in your synopsis and treatment, and that's part of the process. Now, do you have to do that when you're doing it on your own? No, but some people really find that helpful. So if you find that helpful, then absolutely go ahead and do that. But you can kind of skip this step if you want to. The next step, now we're actually down to the writing. So now we're going to write the story. Here we go. Writing from beginning to end, fade in to fade out, the whole thing. You sit down, you try to get it all on paper. You try to generally follow your outline. There's going to be some problems though. You'll notice like, oh, this doesn't work, or this isn't exactly how I was imagining it. I kind of need to change some things up, and that's okay. So you alter your script as you start writing it, and you get to the end. And this is probably the most important part. A lot of people who think they want to be a screenwriter, they start writing, and the first 20 pages are easy. Okay, they're fun, you're getting into it, you're actually putting words down, you're crafting this world that you imagine in your head, these characters you've been imagining, you start writing it, it's a lot of fun. And then it starts to get to be a lot of hard work. And a lot of people stop writing before they get to the end. So if you're like, oh, I think I want to be a screenwriter, this is really your first litmus test. Can you get to the end of your first draft? I mean, if you can get to the end, okay, you at least are much better off than a lot of people who say they want to write. You know, a lot of people will talk about, ooh, I've got an idea for a movie. Will you write it? Like, no, I've got ideas of my own. So I don't need to write your idea. You write your idea. So you can start writing your own idea. And if you can get all the way to the end, okay, now you're so far ahead of the game, because a lot of people stop page 20 to page 50, somewhere in there, and they never do it again. So if you can get all the way to the end, you're ahead of the curve. But once you get to the end, you're not done, because now you have to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, because you've figured out a story. But what happens is you start reading and you're like, oh, this isn't working. Okay, if I change this around and move this around. So rewriting is actually critically important. Well, you've probably heard this saying too. You know, a lot of people will say, like, writing is rewriting. You know, the first draft is one thing, but the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth drafts, okay, that's where the story starts to take shape, and that's where you start to make it really, really good. And the more you write, the fewer drafts you end up having to write, because you're learning things. And, you know, the first time you write a draft of something, okay, it's probably not going to be very good. That's okay. And the second draft, it's a little better. Third draft's a little better. And you kind of fix it, and you like, okay, sixth draft, and you just kind of pull the ripcord, like, okay, I'm going to move on to a new story. You write your new story. So the second time you kind of do this, and you write it beginning to end, and it's actually not horrible. And it's on an equivalency level is probably equivalent to the third draft of the first script you wrote, because you've learned some things, you've incorporated things. So the more you write, the better your drafts get, and the fewer drafts you end up having to write. Now, you still have to rewrite. Everybody rewrites. So just know that that's part of the process. So you've written a script, and then you come back and you rewrite it. Now, to be realistic, this takes a lot of time. Okay, screenwriting is a long game, and you want to know going in, you're investing the time. You'll hear stories, yes, where people say, oh, I wrote a screenplay in like 3 days or 2 days or whatever. Okay, well, they've probably been thinking about it for a while, or they have a pretty good understanding and inherent understanding of story and story structure and storytelling tools, and what's working and what's not working, and when you should employ this one, when you should employ that one. So they can kind of do it a little shorter. Most new writers, it takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months to write a screenplay. 4 to 6 months. Now, you probably also have like a normal job and your normal life, and you're doing things. So you're only writing and working on it for 30 minutes, maybe a couple hours every day, and it just takes a while. So just know, hey, if I'm going to sit down and write a screenplay, this is a long game. It's going to take me a while. Don't expect to get done with it in a week. It's probably going to take you a while to go through all these steps. Professionally, just so you know, if you get hired to write a screenplay professionally, you're usually given about 12 weeks, so about 3 months to do it. So, but you're kind of doing it full time at that point. So now you have a lot of time. And what happens in those 12 weeks typically is the first 4 is the idea and the planning and all of that stuff and figuring it out. Maybe 6 weeks. Almost half of it is just planning. And then once you've done that, then you kind of write a draft. And usually 1 to 2 weeks, you just kind of like bang it out. Just follow the outline, bang it out. And then you have a month or so for rewrites, revisions, things like that. And then you submit it. So typically that's kind of how that works. So just keep in mind, it's a long game. It's going to take you a while. So don't get discouraged if it's been 2 months and you're like, I'm not even halfway through. That's okay. You know, give yourself 4 to 6 months, maybe even longer, depending on how much time you have available to work on it. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it has, please be sure to like, subscribe, bell, all that. I really do appreciate it. If you have comments, questions, be sure to drop them in the comments below, and I will respond to them as I am able. Thank you again for watching. When you go to tell a story, yes, I gave you the 10,000 foot view. So when you're like, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to tell a story. When you do, tell a story that matters. See you later.